The autumn light filtered through the pharmacy windows in pale, diluted streams as I stood beside my grandson, waiting for my prescription. At 67, I'd learned that patience was less a virtue and more a necessity, especially when Tyler was with me. He was 8 years old, restless as mercury, and currently spinning the display rack of reading glasses with enough enthusiasm to make the pharmacist glance over nervously. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Tyler, honey, please stop that, I said gently, placing my hand on his shoulder. He grinned up at me, gap-toothed and mischievous. Sorry, Grandma. I smiled despite myself. He'd been living with my son Fred and daughter-in-law Rachel for 5 years now, since he was 3, and I still marveled at how completely he'd become part of our family. His laughter filled our holiday dinners. His artwork covered Rachel's refrigerator, and his presence had softened something in Fred that I'd worried had calcified permanently after his military service. While the pharmacist counted pills behind the counter, Tyler wandered toward the community bulletin board near the entrance. It was cluttered with the usual small-town detritus: lost cat posters, babysitting services, advertisements for guitar lessons. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard Tyler's voice, oddly flat and uncertain. Grandma? Come look at this. Something in his tone made my heart skip. I moved to his side, following his gaze to a weathered poster pinned among the others. The paper had yellowed slightly, its edges curled with age. Missing child, it declared in bold letters across the top. Below was a photograph of a small boy, perhaps 3 years old, with light brown hair and an impish smile. But it wasn't the smile that stopped my breath. That boy looks just like me when I was little, Tyler said, pointing to the image with a trembling finger. I stared at the poster, my vision tunneling. The child in the photograph had the same distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on his left cheek that Tyler had, a mark so unusual that a dermatologist had once told us it occurred in less than 1% of the population, but it was the eyes that truly seized me. One blue, one hazel, complete heterochromia. Tyler's eyes. The same rare condition he'd been so self-conscious about until we'd convinced him it made him special, unique. The date on the poster indicated the child had been taken 5 years ago from a shopping mall in Columbus, Ohio, 3 hours from our town of Millbrook Creek, Pennsylvania. The boy's name was listed as Cameron Westfield. Age at disappearance, 3 years old. The same age Tyler had been when Rachel and Fred adopted him. It's just a coincidence, sweetheart, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. Lots of children have birthmarks, but not the eyes too, right? Tyler looked up at me, and I saw confusion mixing with something else in his mismatched gaze. Fear, perhaps, or recognition of a deeper kind, something primal and cellular. That's super rare. You always said so. Mrs. Powell, your prescription is ready. The pharmacist's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. I took Tyler's hand. It felt small and cold in mine, and led him to the counter. My fingers shook slightly as I signed the receipt, and I was grateful when we finally pushed through the door into the October air. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the parking lot in chaotic patterns that matched the tumbling of my thoughts. The drive home passed in a blur. Tyler chattered about school, about his friend Josh's new video game, about the science project due next Friday. I made appropriate sounds of interest while my mind worked through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. It had to be a coincidence. People resembled each other all the time. The world was full of strange synchronicities that meant nothing. But 2 rare features? The birthmark and the heterochromia? I'd been present when Fred and Rachel brought Tyler home. They'd been so happy, so relieved after years of trying for a child. Rachel had handled all the adoption paperwork through an agency. I remembered her mentioning it was a private adoption, somewhat expedited because the birth mother wanted it finalized quickly. It had seemed like an answer to prayers at the time, a blessing after so much disappointment. We pulled into my driveway, and Tyler unbuckled his seatbelt. Thanks for taking me, Grandma. Mom said she'd pick me up at 4. Of course, honey. I managed a smile. Want some cookies while you wait? His face brightened, and for a moment, he was just a normal 8-year-old boy again, not a walking question mark. We went inside. and I set him up at the kitchen table with chocolate chip cookies and milk while I put the pharmacy bag in the bathroom cabinet. When I returned, I found him doing homework, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on long division. I sat across from him, watching his face in the afternoon light slanting through the windows. He looked so much like Fred at that age. Or did I only think so because I wanted to believe it? Adoption created family as surely as biology did. I'd always believed that. Tyler was my grandson in every way that mattered. Except, the poster burned in my memory. Cameron Westfield, 3 years old, taken from a shopping mall. The photograph showed a child with the same distinctive features. The same birthmark, the same impossible eyes. At 4 o'clock, Rachel's minivan pulled into the driveway. Tyler grabbed his backpack and ran to the door, calling goodbye over his shoulder. I followed more slowly, watching through the screen door as he climbed into the vehicle. Rachel waved to me from the driver's seat, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired. She'd been working long hours at the hospital where she was a nurse. But her face lit up when Tyler said something that made her laugh. They were a good family, a loving family. Whatever secrets might be hidden in Tyler's past, I couldn't doubt that he was loved and well cared for in the present. But I couldn't ignore what I'd seen either. That night, I made myself dinner, just scrambled eggs and toast. I had no appetite for anything more, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The house felt too quiet, filled with the settling sounds of old wood and the occasional creak of pipes. My late husband Tom had died 3 years ago, and I still wasn't used to the silence, the absence of his presence in the rooms we'd shared for 42 years. I typed, "Cameron Westfield missing child," into the search engine. The results loaded slowly, my rural internet connection struggling with the request. Then articles began appearing, one after another. My chest tightened as I read through them. Cameron Westfield, age 3, had indeed been abducted from Eastgate Mall in Columbus, Ohio, 5 years ago. His mother, Jennifer Westfield, had turned away for less than a minute to answer her phone. When she looked back, her son was gone. The case had received significant media attention initially, but had eventually gone cold. The articles showed photographs of Jennifer and her parents, Cameron's grandparents, at press conferences, their faces carved with grief. The mother had died 2 years after the abduction, the articles said. An accidental overdose, though some sources hinted it might not have been entirely accidental. The guilt, one article suggested delicately, had been too much to bear. I clicked through to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. The case was still listed as open. There was a phone number to call with any information, any tips, any sightings. Rewards were mentioned. Hope, desperate and enduring, bled through the formal language of the listing. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. This was insane. I was considering something that would destroy my family, shatter my grandson's world, break my son's heart. Based on what? A resemblance to a poster? Children looked alike all the time, but not with 2 rare features. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to the house breathe around me. I thought about Fred, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and come home different, quieter, more guarded. I thought about Rachel, who'd endured 3 miscarriages before they'd decided to adopt. I thought about Tyler, who called me every Sunday just to tell me about his week, who saved his best artwork to bring to my house, who'd told me once that I made the best pancakes in the whole world. I couldn't make this phone call based on suspicion alone. I needed to be certain. But how? The answer came to me around midnight, when I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The adoption papers. Rachel had mentioned once that she kept all the important documents in a fireproof safe in their home office. If the adoption had been legitimate, the paperwork would prove it. There would be documentation, records, a clear trail from birth mother to adoptive parents. And if the adoption hadn't been legitimate, I pushed the thought away, but it lingered like smoke. The next morning, I called Rachel. "Hi, honey. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, it's fine. I'm just doing laundry." I could hear the washing machine's rumble in the background. "What's up?" "I've been organizing some things for tax season," I lied, surprised at how smoothly the deception came. "And I realized I should have copies of Tyler's adoption papers for my records." You know, in case anything ever happened to you and Fred. Just to have documentation that he's my grandson. There was a pause. That's oddly morbid, Carol. I know, I'm sorry. I've just been thinking about mortality lately. Getting older, you know? That part wasn't a lie. It would just give me peace of mind. Sure, I can make you copies. Let me pull them from the safe this weekend. Thank you, dear. I appreciate it. We chatted for a few more minutes about ordinary things. Tyler's upcoming birthday, a sale at the grocery store, the weather turning colder. When I hung up, I felt simultaneously relieved and guilty. I was investigating my own family, treating them like suspects. What kind of grandmother did that make me? The kind who'd seen that poster, I reminded myself. The kind who couldn't unsee it. Saturday came. Rachel called in the afternoon, and I heard something strange in her voice. A tightness. A barely controlled panic. Carol? Can you come over? Now? Of course. What's wrong? I can't find the adoption papers. Her voice cracked. I've looked everywhere. They're not in the safe, they're not in any of our files. They're just gone. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart hammering. I'll be right there. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, one thought circled through my mind like a vulture. Someone had taken those papers, and I needed to find out who and why before it was too late. Rachel was pacing in the living room when I arrived, her face pale and drawn. Fred sat on the couch, his military posture rigid, jaw clenched in that way he had when he was trying to maintain control. Tyler was at a friend's house, Rachel had told me over the phone, which was a small mercy. Whatever was happening here didn't need to unfold in front of him. I don't understand, Rachel said for what must have been the 10th time. I put those papers in the safe 5 years ago. I remember doing it. The birth certificate, the adoption decree, all the agency documentation, everything was there. When did you last see them? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Maybe 2 years ago? When we applied for Tyler's passport for that trip to Canada. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Fred, you remember? We took everything out to photocopy it. Fred nodded slowly. And you put it back? Of course I put it back. Her voice rose, defensive. I'm not careless with important documents, Fred. You know that. I sat down in the armchair across from them, my purse clutched in my lap. What about the combination to the safe? Who knows it? Just us, Fred said. And you, Mom. We gave it to you last year in case of emergency. That was true. They'd written it down for me when they'd gone on their anniversary weekend, in case something happened and I needed to access important papers. The combination was tucked in my wallet right now, written on a small card behind my driver's license. Could anyone else have gotten into the house? I asked. Workers? House guests? Rachel shook her head. We had the carpets cleaned in July, but I was home the whole time. And my sister stayed with us in August, but she wouldn't. She stopped, looking stricken. No, Lauren would never. But something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps. Or memory. What is it? I leaned forward. Nothing. It's just... Rachel twisted her hands together. Lauren asked me about Tyler's adoption while she was here. She wanted to know about the process, the agency we used. She and David have been thinking about adopting. Fred's expression hardened. You think your sister took our son's papers? No, I'm just saying she was curious about them. She asked to see the adoption decree, to understand what the legal documents looked like. Rachel's voice cracked. I showed her. I took everything out of the safe and showed her, and then I put it all back. I swear I did. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I watched Fred's face, saw the suspicion taking root. I'd never been particularly close to Rachel's sister Lauren. She was younger, ambitious, worked in real estate in Philadelphia. There'd always been a subtle competitiveness between the sisters, a dynamic I'd observed but never commented on. We need to call her, Fred said. And say what? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Accuse her of stealing our son's papers? That's insane, Fred. She's my sister. Then you call her. Ask if she accidentally took something, mixed up some papers. His tone left no room for argument. Rachel pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed. The call went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. She's probably at a showing, Rachel said weakly. She'll call back. I cleared my throat. In the meantime, maybe we should contact the adoption agency. They'll have copies of everything, won't they? Rachel and Fred exchanged a glance that sent ice through my veins. It was the briefest of looks, but I'd been a mother long enough to recognize when my child was keeping something from me. Mom, Fred said carefully, the agency closed down about 4 years ago. Closed down? They went out of business, Rachel added quickly. There was some kind of financial trouble. But the state would have all the records, right? Adoption records are public, or at least accessible through the courts. I nodded, though something felt wrong. An adoption agency going out of business. Was that common? What was the agency's name? Loving Families Adoption Services, Rachel said. They were based in Pittsburgh. I made a mental note to research them later. And the birth mother? Do you have any way to contact her? Another glance between them. It was a closed adoption, Fred said. We never met her. Everything went through the agency. But you have her name, surely? For medical history, genetic information? Rachel nodded. Jennifer Morrison. She was young, maybe 21 or 22. The agency told us she wanted a closed adoption because she was ashamed, because her family was religious and didn't approve. They said she signed away all rights and didn't want any contact. Jennifer. Not Jennifer Westfield, the name from the missing child case. But Morrison was a common surname. She could have been using a different name. Or maybe, and this thought made my stomach churn, maybe there had never been a Jennifer Morrison at all. Did you ever verify her identity? I asked. See identification? Check that she was who she said she was? Fred's expression shifted, defensive. The agency verified everything, Mom. That's what we paid them for. They did background checks, medical screenings, psychological evaluations. It was all legitimate. But was it? The question hung in the air, unspoken. Rachel's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went white. It's a text from Lauren. What does it say? Fred moved to her side. Rachel read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Got your calls. Can't talk now. Destroying some papers I shouldn't have taken. Don't ask. Love you. The room seemed to tilt. Fred grabbed the phone from Rachel's hands and stared at the message as if he could change the words through force of will. Call her back, he demanded. Right now. Rachel tried. No answer. She sent a text. What papers? Lauren, what are you talking about? The 3 dots appeared briefly, indicating Lauren was typing, then disappeared. Nothing came through. I'm driving to Philadelphia, Fred said, already moving toward the door. I'll get answers from her in person. Fred, wait! Rachel started, but he was already grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. Stay here in case she calls back. I'll be there in 2 hours. He paused, looking back at us. Mom, can you stay with Rachel? I don't want her alone right now. I nodded. Of course. After Fred left, the house felt hollow. Rachel sank onto the couch, her phone clutched in both hands as if she could will it to ring. I sat beside her, my mind racing through the implications of Lauren's text. Destroying papers she shouldn't have taken. Why would she destroy them? Why not just return them? Unless there was something in those papers, something incriminating. Something that would reveal a truth too dangerous to preserve. Rachel, I said gently, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. Okay. When you adopted Tyler, did anything about the process seem unusual? Rushed, perhaps? Or was the agency evasive about any details? She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't want to see anything wrong, she finally said. We'd been trying for so long. 3 miscarriages, Carol. 3 times I thought I was going to be a mother, and 3 times... Her voice broke. When the agency called and said they had a 3-year-old boy available immediately, I didn't ask too many questions. I just said yes. Immediately? No waiting period? They said the birth mother had backed out of another adoption at the last minute. The other family was devastated, but it meant Tyler needed a home right away. She wiped her eyes. The agency director, Mr. Peterson, he said it was fate, that Tyler was meant to be ours. A chill ran down my spine. How much did you pay the agency? $40,000. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but that seemed high. much higher than typical adoption costs, even for private agencies. It covered everything, Rachel added defensively. Legal fees, medical expenses for the birth mother, counseling services. Mr. Peterson explained it all. And the birth certificate? Did it list Jennifer Morrison as Tyler's mother? Rachel nodded. Yes. And her age, her city of birth, Harrisburg. It looked completely legitimate, Carol. I know what you're thinking, but we weren't stupid. We researched everything. The agency had been in business for 15 years. They had references, successful adoptions, good reviews. Except the agency had closed down 4 years later. Financial trouble, they'd said. Or something else. I pulled out my phone. I'm going to do some research while we wait for Fred to call. Research on what? Loving Families Adoption Services. I want to know why they really closed. Rachel didn't object. She just sat there, staring at her phone, waiting for it to deliver salvation or damnation. I typed the agency name into my browser. The results were sparse. A few cached pages from old websites, some archived articles from Pittsburgh newspapers. I clicked on one dated 6 years ago, a small article in the local news section. State investigators probe Pittsburgh adoption agency. My heart rate accelerated as I read. The agency had been investigated for irregularities in their documentation practices. Nothing had been proven, but the inquiry had damaged their reputation. The article mentioned that several families had come forward with questions about their adoptions, though details were kept confidential to protect the children involved. The agency had closed 2 years after this article was published. I showed Rachel the article. Her face went from pale to gray. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice held no conviction. "Lots of businesses get investigated and turn out to be fine." "Rachel? No." She stood abruptly. "I don't want to hear it, Carol. Tyler is our son. We love him. He loves us. Whatever questions you have, whatever doubts, they don't change that fact. I know you love him," I said carefully. "But if there's any chance of what? That he was kidnapped? That we somehow unknowingly adopted a stolen child?" Her voice rose, shrill with panic. "Do you understand what you're suggesting? We'd lose him, Carol. They'd take him away from us. If he was taken from another family, don't they deserve to know he's alive?" Rachel looked at me with something close to hatred. "Get out. Rachel, get out of my house." She was shaking, her whole body vibrating with fear and rage. "You're supposed to be on our side. You're supposed to support your family, not destroy it." I stood slowly, gathering my purse. "I'm trying to protect our family, all of it, including Tyler. Tyler is protected, he's happy, he's safe, he's loved. That's all that matters." I walked to the door, then turned back. What if his biological family is still looking for him? What if they've spent 5 years in agony, wondering if he's alive, if he's suffering, if they'll ever see him again? Don't they matter? Rachel's face crumpled. "Leave. Please, just leave." I left, but as I drove home through the darkening streets, I knew I couldn't let this go. Too many pieces fit too perfectly. The closed agency, the rushed adoption, the missing papers, Lauren's cryptic text about destroying documents, and that poster, that haunting, impossible resemblance. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and opened my laptop again. I navigated to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website and pulled up Cameron Westfield's case file. There was a phone number listed for tips. My finger hovered over my phone's keypad. One call could answer all my questions. One call could also destroy my family. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a terrible coincidence, and my suspicions ripped Tyler away from loving parents for nothing? But what if I was right, and my silence condemned another family to a lifetime of not knowing? I thought about the article I'd read earlier, about Cameron's mother, Jennifer Westfield, dying of an overdose. The guilt, they'd said. The unbearable weight of losing her child. I thought about Tyler, laughing at my kitchen table, spinning the glasses display at the pharmacy, pointing at that poster with a trembling finger. That boy looks just like me. I picked up my phone. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number on the website. It rang 3 times before someone answered. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This is Officer Patricia Reeves. How can I help you? I took a deep breath. My name is Carol Powell, I said, and I think I may have seen Cameron Westfield. Officer Reeves was professional, almost gentle, as she took down my information. My name, my address, the nature of my tip. When I described Tyler's birthmark and heterochromia, I heard her breathing change, a subtle catch that told me everything I needed to know. Mrs. Powell, those are very specific identifying features. Can you tell me how you know this child? My mouth went dry. He's my grandson. My son and daughter-in-law adopted him 5 years ago when he was 3 years old. The pause that followed felt infinite. I need you to stay exactly where you are, Officer Reeves said, her tone shifting from gentle to commanding. Don't contact your son or daughter-in-law. Don't discuss this with anyone. I'm going to have local authorities reach out to you within the hour. Do you understand? Yes, but Mrs. Powell, if this child is Cameron Westfield, you've potentially identified the victim of a kidnapping. This is now an active investigation. We'll need to handle this carefully to ensure the child's safety and preserve evidence. Do you understand? I understand. My voice sounded small, distant. Someone will be there soon. Thank you for calling. You may have just brought a family closure after 5 years. After she hung up, I sat in the kitchen darkness, my tea growing cold in front of me. What had I done? I'd set in motion a sequence of events that would tear my family apart. Rachel's face when she told me to leave, that mixture of fear and betrayal, was burned into my mind. But I kept seeing that other face, too. Jennifer Westfield at press conferences, begging for her son's return. The articles said she'd never recovered, that she'd died still hoping, still wondering. My phone rang. Fred. I stared at it, letting it ring through to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. Lauren won't answer her door. Neighbors say she left in a hurry this afternoon with a suitcase. Mom, what's going on? Before I could decide whether to respond, headlights swept across my front windows. A dark sedan pulled into my driveway, followed by a marked police car. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was happening. I opened the door before they could knock. 2 people stood on my porch, a woman in her 40s wearing a blazer and badge on her belt, and a uniformed officer who looked barely older than 25. Mrs. Powell? I'm Detective Sarah Morrison with the Pennsylvania State Police, and this is Officer Kent. May we come in? Morrison. The same last name Rachel had said belonged to Tyler's supposed birth mother. Coincidence? Or was the universe underlining the absurdity of this situation? I led them to my living room. Detective Morrison sat in the armchair Tom used to favor, pulling out a notepad. Officer Kent remained standing near the door, his hand resting casually near his service weapon, in a way that made me acutely aware I was now part of something dangerous. Officer Reeves briefed me on your call. Detective Morrison began. You believe your grandson Tyler may be Cameron Westfield, a child who was abducted 5 years ago from Columbus, Ohio. I don't want to believe it, I said quietly. But the resemblance is impossible to ignore. The birthmark, the heterochromia, those are extremely rare features, and Tyler has both. Exactly like the missing child. Tell me about the adoption. I recounted everything I knew. The agency, the closed adoption, the rushed timeline, the $40,000 fee. I told her about the missing papers, about Lauren's text message, about the article I'd found concerning the agency's investigation. Detective Morrison's pen moved steadily across her notepad. Loving Families Adoption Services was shut down years ago as part of a multi-state investigation into illegal adoptions. The director, Robert Peterson, disappeared before he could be charged. We've been trying to track him for years. The room tilted. Illegal adoptions? The agency was facilitating adoptions of kidnapped children, creating false documentation, and charging desperate couples exorbitant fees. We've identified at least 12 cases definitively, and we suspect there are more. The families who adopted these children had no idea. They believed everything was legitimate. Oh, sweet mercy, I whispered. My son and daughter-in-law were victims too. They'd wanted a child so desperately, and someone had exploited that desire, had turned them into unwitting accomplices to kidnapping. Mrs. Powell, I need to ask, where is Tyler now? At a friend's house. The Hendersons. They live on Oak Street. We'll need to see him to verify the identifying marks. We'll also need a DNA sample. And then what? My voice cracked. If he is Cameron Westfield, what happens to my family? Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly. That will be determined by the courts and by Cameron's biological family. But Mrs. Powell, you did the right thing calling this in. If this child was stolen, his biological family deserves to know he's alive. Officer Kent's radio crackled. He stepped outside to respond, and I heard muffled voices through the door. There's something else, Detective Morrison said. The Westfield case is complicated. Cameron's mother died 2 years after his abduction, but his maternal grandparents are still alive. Richard and Dorothy Miller. They've never stopped searching for their grandson. Grandparents. Like me. People who'd lost a child they loved. Who'd spent years in a particular kind of hell. Officer Kent returned, his face grim. Detective, we have a situation. A car registered to Lauren Phillips, that's the sister-in-law Mrs. Powell mentioned, was just found abandoned at a rest stop on I-76. There's blood on the steering wheel. My hand flew to my mouth. Blood? We don't know if it's hers yet, Detective Morrison said quickly. But we need to locate her immediately. Mrs. Powell, do you have any idea where she might have gone? I shook my head, too stunned to speak. Lauren had taken Tyler's papers and then vanished with a suitcase. Now her car was abandoned with blood inside. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see. She has a beach house, I said suddenly. In Delaware. Rachel mentioned it once. Lauren inherited it from an aunt. I don't know the address, but Rachel would. We'll need to contact your daughter-in-law, Detective Morrison said, standing. Is there somewhere else you can stay tonight? We're going to need to execute a search warrant on your son's home, and it would be better if you weren't there. A search warrant? The words felt unreal. They haven't done anything wrong. They may have evidence related to a kidnapping, even if they were unaware of it. We need to examine everything. Tyler's belongings, documents, photos from when they first got him. Anything that might help us understand how this adoption was facilitated. My phone buzzed. A text from Fred. Mom, cops are at our house. Rachel is hysterical. What did you do? I showed the message to Detective Morrison. She read it and nodded. They know we're here. I should go coordinate with the team there. Mrs. Powell, do you have family or friends you can stay with tonight? My neighbor, Diane. We've known each other for 30 years. Good. Pack a bag and go there now. We'll be in touch tomorrow. She handed me a business card. If you think of anything else, or if anyone contacts you, especially Lauren Phillips, call me immediately. After they left, I sat in the silence, trying to process what had just happened. My phone rang again. Rachel this time. I answered. How could you? Her voice was raw, shredded. How could you call the police on your own family? Rachel, I saw the poster. I had to. They're tearing apart Tyler's room. They took his toothbrush for DNA, Carol. They're treating us like criminals. And Tyler. She choked on a sob. Tyler came home from Josh's house to find police cars in the driveway. He's terrified. He thinks he did something wrong. Guilt crashed over me in waves. I'm so sorry. I didn't want this to happen this way. What did you think would happen? That you could destroy our lives without consequences? Rachel's voice turned cold. Fred wants nothing to do with you. He said if Tyler is taken from us, you're not welcome in our lives anymore. Do you understand? You'll lose your grandson either way. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone in hand, as tears finally came. I'd made the call believing it was right, believing truth mattered more than comfort. But Rachel was right too. I was destroying my family. Tyler, innocent and confused, was caught in the middle. I packed a bag mechanically, my mind numb. As I was heading out the door, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Powell? This is Dorothy Miller. The woman's voice was cultured, older, trembling with emotion. The police called me. They told me you might have found my Cameron. I sank onto the stairs, my legs unable to support me. Mrs. Miller, They showed me a current photo of Tyler, your grandson. I know it's been many years, but I see my Jennifer in his face. I see my grandson. She was crying now. Quiet tears I could hear in her breathing. Is it really him? Please, I need to know. Is my baby alive? I don't know for certain yet, I managed. They're doing DNA tests. But Mrs. Miller, you should know, if he is Cameron, he's been loved. My son and daughter-in-law adore him. They had no idea. I don't blame them, she said quickly. The detective explained about the agency. They're victims too. But Mrs. Powell, if this child is my Cameron, I need to see him. Even if he doesn't remember me, even if he's happy where he is, I need to see my grandson before I die. The raw need in her voice broke something in me. I thought about Tom, about how I'd felt when I lost him. Now imagine losing a grandchild and living with that loss for 5 years. Hope fading a little more each day. If he's Cameron, I said, you'll see him, I promise. After we hung up, I called Diane. She came over immediately, asking no questions when she saw my face. I threw my bag in her car and took one last look at my house before we drove away. My phone buzzed with another text from Fred. Mom, the DNA results will take a few days. But the detective showed us Cameron Westfield's missing poster side by side with Tyler's school photo. They're the same child. We all know it. Then, seconds later, Tyler asked me why that boy on the poster looks like him. I didn't know what to say. How do you tell an 8-year-old that everything he knows might be a lie? I stared at the messages as Diane drove through the quiet streets. This was my fault. I'd opened this door, released these consequences. There was no closing it now. My phone rang once more. Detective Morrison. Mrs. Powell, we found Lauren Phillips. My heart stopped. Is she alive? Barely. She attempted suicide. Overdose of sleeping pills combined with alcohol. She left a note. The detective paused. Mrs. Powell, she confessed. She worked for Loving Families Adoption Services 5 years ago as an intake coordinator. She helped facilitate Tyler's adoption, knowing he was a kidnapped child. The blood in her car was from where she cut herself trying to destroy documents. She's at Mercy Hospital now, under guard. I couldn't breathe. Rachel's own sister had been part of the conspiracy. She'd looked Rachel in the eye, had held Tyler, had celebrated birthdays and holidays, all while knowing the truth. There's more, Detective Morrison continued. In her note, Lauren said Robert Peterson, the agency director, is still operating. He's running a similar scheme in North Carolina under a different name. She provided details. We're coordinating with authorities there now. Why did she take the papers? I asked. Why destroy them now? She was being blackmailed. Peterson contacted her 3 weeks ago, demanding money to keep quiet about her involvement. She panicked. She took the adoption papers from your son's house to destroy evidence, but she couldn't go through with it. Guilt, she wrote in her note. She couldn't live with what she'd done anymore. After I hung up, I told Diane everything. She listened in stunned silence, then pulled me into a tight hug. You did what you had to do, she said. That took courage. But as I lay in her guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, I didn't feel courageous. I felt like I detonated a bomb in the center of my family, and I had no idea what would be left when the smoke cleared. My phone glowed with one final message sent at 11:47 p.m. It was from Tyler. Grandma, I'm scared. Why won't anyone tell me what's happening? I typed, and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on, I love you, sweetheart. Everything will be okay. It felt like the biggest lie I'd ever told. The DNA results came back in 72 hours, though it felt like 72 years. I spent those days at Diane's house, watching my phone obsessively, fielding calls from Detective Morrison, and trying unsuccessfully to reach Fred or Rachel. They wouldn't answer. Every call went to voicemail. Every text went unread. Tyler stopped messaging me after that first night. On the third day, Detective Morrison came to Diane's house personally. I knew from her face before she said a word. It's a match, she said quietly. Tyler Powell is Cameron Westfield. I sat down heavily, even though I'd known. Some part of me had been hoping for a miracle, for the DNA to prove me wrong, to let me put this nightmare back in its box. But reality didn't work that way. What happens now? I asked. That's complicated. Detective Morrison sat across from me, her notepad closed for once. The Millers, Cameron's biological grandparents, have legal standing to petition for custody. But so do Fred and Rachel, who have been his legal parents for 5 years based on a fraudulent adoption. The courts will have to decide what's in the child's best interest. He doesn't remember them, I said. Cameron, Tyler. He was only 3 when he was taken. He won't remember his biological mother or grandparents. I know. That's why this is so difficult. She paused. There's another complication. The story leaked to the press. It's going to be all over the news by tonight. My stomach dropped. The press? A missing child found alive after 5 years. Raised by an unknowing family. Sister-in-law involved in the kidnapping ring. It's exactly the kind of story that captures national attention. Her expression was apologetic. I'm sorry, Mrs. Powell. I know this makes an already impossible situation worse. She was right. By evening, news vans were parked outside Fred and Rachel's house. My phone exploded with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Diane had to disconnect her doorbell because journalists kept ringing it, asking for comments. I watched the news coverage with a sick feeling in my stomach. They showed Tyler's school photo next to Cameron Westfield's missing poster. They interviewed the Millers, who wept on camera and talked about their daughter Jennifer's death, about 5 years of searching, about the miracle of discovering their grandson was alive. They also interviewed a lawyer named Bernice Vance, who'd appeared from nowhere claiming to represent Fred and Rachel. My clients are devastated, Vance said into the cameras, her expression severe. They are loving parents who were victimized by a criminal enterprise. They had no knowledge that their son's adoption was anything but legitimate. Now they face losing the child they've raised for 5 years. This is a tragedy for everyone involved. I noticed she didn't mention me. I wasn't part of the family narrative anymore. My phone rang. An unknown number, but I answered anyway, desperate for any information. Mrs. Powell? This is Bernice Vance. I'm representing your son and daughter-in-law. I know who you are. I just saw you on television. Then you know how serious this situation is. Her tone was crisp, businesslike. I need you to understand something. Anything you say to the press, to the Millers, or to anyone else can be used against Fred and Rachel in court. They are fighting for their son. I need you to stay silent. I haven't talked to any reporters. Good. Keep it that way. She paused. I also need you to know that Fred and Rachel are considering filing a civil suit against you for emotional distress and damage to their family. The words hit like a physical blow. A lawsuit? Your actions, calling the police, initiating this investigation, have resulted in tremendous harm to my clients. They've lost their privacy. Their reputations are being questioned, and they may lose their child. They have grounds for a suit. I was trying to do the right thing, I whispered. The right thing? Vance's voice hardened. Mrs. Powell, you destroyed a family. You could have come to them first, discussed your concerns privately, consulted with attorneys to find a solution that protected everyone. Instead, you went directly to the authorities, triggering a media circus and a custody battle that will traumatize that little boy for the rest of his life. She was right. I had other options. I could have hired a private investigator, could have researched more before making that call. But I'd been so certain, so convinced that immediate action was necessary. I need to talk to Fred, I said. Please. He's my son. Fred doesn't want to speak with you. Neither does Rachel. My advice is to give them space and to prepare yourself for the possibility that your relationship with them is permanently damaged. Vance's tone softened slightly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Powell. I know you thought you were helping, but good intentions don't erase consequences. After she hung up, I sat in Diane's living room and finally let myself break down completely. Diane held me while I sobbed, not offering platitudes or false comfort. What comfort could there be? I'd lost my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson. I'd torn apart the family I'd been trying to protect. The next morning, Detective Morrison called again. Mrs. Powell, we've made an arrest. Robert Peterson was picked up in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was operating under the name Richard Patterson, running another illegal adoption service. That's good, I said numbly. We found his records. Mrs. Powell, there are 18 other children, 18 families who may have unknowingly adopted kidnapped children. She paused. Your tip didn't just help the Millers. It may help reunite other families, stop other people from being victimized. You should know that. but it didn't make me feel better. 18 other families were about to go through what we were experiencing. 18 other children would learn their lives were built on lies. There's something else, Morrison continued. Lauren Phillips is awake. She's talking, cooperating fully. She provided detailed information about how the ring operated. Her testimony is going to be crucial in prosecuting Peterson and others involved. Is she going to be charged? Yes. But given her cooperation and her obvious remorse, the prosecutor may offer a plea deal. She'll serve time, but probably not as much as she would have otherwise. Rachel's sister. A criminal. I thought about family dinners where Lauren had sat across from Tyler, smiling at him, playing with him, all while carrying the knowledge of what she'd done. How did someone live with that kind of guilt? The same way I was living with mine, I supposed. One terrible day at a time. That afternoon, I received a certified letter. I signed for it with shaking hands, already knowing what it would say. It was from Bernice Vance's law firm. Fred and Rachel were filing for a restraining order to keep me away from Tyler pending the resolution of the custody case. They were also formally notifying me of their intent to pursue civil damages. The restraining order meant I couldn't attend Tyler's birthday next month. Couldn't see him at Christmas. Couldn't talk to him, text him, or contact him in any way. I'd lost him. My phone rang. Dorothy Miller. Mrs. Powell, I just heard about the restraining order. Her voice was gentle. I'm so sorry. I know you're suffering too. You have nothing to apologize for, I said. You're getting your grandson back. Maybe, maybe not. She sighed. The lawyers are telling me that even though Cameron is biologically my grandson, the courts may decide he's better off staying with Fred and Rachel. They've been his parents for 5 years. He knows them, loves them. Taking him from them could be considered harmful to his well-being. What do you want? I asked. I want what's best for Cameron, but I also want to know my grandson, Mrs. Powell. Jennifer was my only child. When I lost her, I thought I'd lost everything. Discovering Cameron is alive, it's like getting a piece of her back. Her voice cracked. Is that selfish? No, I said. It's human. Would you meet with me? And my husband Richard? We'd like to talk to you about Cameron, about Tyler. You know him. We don't. We need to understand who he is now, not just who he was 5 years ago. I agreed to meet them the next day at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. When I walked in, I recognized them immediately from the news coverage. Dorothy was a small woman in her 70s with silver hair and Jennifer's eyes. Tyler's eyes. Richard was tall, stooped, his face carved with grief and cautious hope. We sat in a corner booth, and for an hour I told them everything I knew about Tyler. His favorite foods, his fear of thunderstorms, his talent for drawing, his infectious laugh, the way he hummed when he was concentrating, how he'd started asking questions about why he looked different from Fred and Rachel, and how they'd handled it with grace and love. Dorothy cried quietly through most of it. Richard took notes, as if he could preserve these details, make up for 8 lost years through careful documentation. He sounds wonderful, Dorothy said finally. You've described a happy, well-adjusted child. That's because of your son and daughter-in-law, isn't it? I nodded. They're good parents. They love him completely. But he's our blood, Richard said, his first words in 30 minutes. Our daughter died thinking her son was dead or suffering somewhere. Don't we have a right to be part of his life? Yes, I said. But Tyler has rights too. The right to stability, to stay with the only parents he remembers. So what do we do? Dorothy asked. How do we resolve this without destroying him? I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was doing the right thing by calling the police. But I've made everything worse. My son won't speak to me. Tyler is caught in a legal battle. The press is turning this into entertainment. I don't have answers anymore. Dorothy reached across the table and took my hand. You did do the right thing. It's just that sometimes the right thing has terrible costs. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard spoke again. There might be a way, he said slowly. What if we don't fight Fred and Rachel for custody? What if we propose a different arrangement? What kind of arrangement? I asked. Shared custody isn't right. Tyler shouldn't be torn between 2 homes. But what if we petition the court for visitation rights as biological grandparents? Let him stay with Fred and Rachel, but also let us be part of his life. Let him know his history, his biological family, while keeping his current family intact. Dorothy was nodding. We could start slowly. Supervised visits at first, just getting to know each other. No pressure, no demands. Let him adjust. It made sense. It was reasonable, compassionate even. But there was one problem. Fred and Rachel would have to agree, I said. And right now, they're not in an agreeing mood. They see this as a battle they have to win completely. Maybe we could propose it through the lawyers, Richard suggested. Present it as a compromise that serves Tyler's best interests. Or, Dorothy said quietly, maybe you could talk to them, Mrs. Powell. Maybe you could help broker this arrangement. I laughed bitterly. They have a restraining order against me. They won't even take my calls. But you're their best chance for a peaceful resolution, Dorothy insisted. You know both sides. You understand what everyone stands to lose. If anyone can bring Fred and Rachel to the table, it's you. She was asking me to do the one thing I wasn't capable of, reconcile with my son and daughter-in-law. They'd made their position clear. I was the enemy now. But if I didn't try, this would go to court. Lawyers would fight, judges would decide, and Tyler would be caught in the middle, watching the adults who were supposed to protect him tear each other apart. I'll try, I said, but I can't promise anything. After leaving the coffee shop, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to figure out how to approach Fred. The restraining order meant I couldn't go to his house. I couldn't call. Email felt too impersonal for something this important. Then I remembered Bernice Vance. She was the intermediary whether I liked it or not. I called her office. Ms. Vance, this is Carol Powell. I need you to deliver a message to Fred and Rachel. Mrs. Powell, I've advised my clients not to have contact with you. This isn't about me. It's about a proposal from the Millers. I explained the visitation arrangement. The compromise that could keep Tyler with Fred and Rachel while giving the Millers access to their grandson. Vance was quiet for a long moment. That's actually reasonable. Let me discuss it with my clients. But Mrs. Powell, don't get your hopes up. They're very angry right now. I know. But will you try? I'll try. That night, as I lay in Diane's guest room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Fred. Vance told me about the Millers' proposal. We're considering it. But even if we agree, it doesn't change what you did. It doesn't fix us. I stared at the message, then typed back. I know. I'm sorry isn't enough. But I am sorry. I love you and Tyler more than anything. The 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing. Then they disappeared. No response came. But maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. Not for me. I'd lost that chance. But for Tyler, for Fred and Rachel, for the Millers, maybe they could find a way to build something new from the wreckage I'd created. The next morning, Detective Morrison called with one final piece of news. Robert Peterson is talking. He's trying to cut a deal, so he's giving up everyone involved in the ring. She paused. Mrs. Powell, he mentioned something that might interest you. He said your daughter-in-law's sister, Lauren, wasn't just an intake coordinator. She was supposed to monitor the adopted children, make sure the families never suspected anything. Monitor them how? By staying close. Lauren didn't just work for the agency. She maintained relationships with the families to ensure their silence. If anyone started asking questions, she'd report back to Peterson. He'd either threaten the family or, if necessary, make the child disappear again. My blood ran cold. Are you saying Lauren befriended Rachel specifically to watch Tyler? We believe so. The timing of her renewed closeness to Rachel coincides with Tyler's adoption. She visited frequently, maintained regular contact. She was insurance. Does Rachel know this? Not yet. We'll need to interview her about it. Morrison's voice softened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Powell. I know this makes everything even more painful. After she hung up, I thought about the layers of betrayal Rachel was experiencing. Her sister hadn't just facilitated Tyler's illegal adoption. She'd spent 5 years spying on them, pretending to care, ready to destroy them if they got too close to the truth. How did anyone recover from that? My phone rang again. This time it was Bernice Vance. Mrs. Powell, I have news. Fred and Rachel have agreed to meet with the Millers to discuss the visitation proposal. They want you there too. Me? But the restraining order... They're willing to temporarily suspend it for this meeting. They want to hear directly from you why you think this arrangement is best for Tyler. She paused. This doesn't mean they've forgiven you, but they're willing to listen. Don't waste this chance. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon, at Vance's office. Neutral territory. I had one shot to convince my son and daughter-in-law that peace was possible, that Tyler didn't have to lose anyone, that families could be expanded rather than destroyed. One shot to fix at least part of what I'd broken. I just prayed it would be enough. I arrived at Bernice Vance's office 30 minutes early, my hands trembling as I clutched a folder I'd prepared the night before. Diane had helped me organize everything. Timeline documents, research on shared custody arrangements, articles about adoption dissolution cases and their psychological impact on children. I needed to be prepared, needed to show Fred and Rachel that I'd thought this through, that I wasn't just reacting emotionally anymore. The office was in a converted historic building downtown, all exposed brick and polished wood floors. A receptionist directed me to a conference room on the second floor. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a journey toward either redemption or final condemnation. The conference room was empty when I entered. Large windows overlooked the street below, where I could see Detective Morrison's car parked across from a news van. Even here, the media was circling. I sat at the long mahogany table and waited, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain myself. Bernice Vance entered first, carrying a briefcase and wearing the same severe expression I'd seen on television. "Mrs. Powell, thank you for being punctual. Thank you for arranging this." She nodded curtly and began setting up her laptop at the head of the table. "I want to establish some ground rules before the others arrive. This is a mediation session, not a family therapy appointment. We're here to discuss a specific proposal regarding Tyler's future. Personal grievances and recriminations are not productive. I understand. Do you?" She looked at me directly. "Because I've seen these situations before, Mrs. Powell. Families torn apart by good intentions. The key to resolution is everyone checking their ego at the door and focusing solely on what's best for the child." Before I could respond, voices echoed in the hallway. Fred and Rachel appeared in the doorway, and my heart clenched at the sight of them. Fred looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. Dark circles under his eyes, his face gaunt. Rachel's eyes were red and swollen, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Neither of them looked at me. They sat across the table, as far from me as the room allowed. "Where are the Millers?" Vance asked. "They should be here any moment," Fred said, his voice flat and emotionless. "They texted that they were parking." The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything, but Vance's warning kept me quiet. Rachel stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around and around. Fred stared at the wall behind my head, looking through me rather than at me. Richard and Dorothy Miller arrived 5 minutes later. Dorothy's eyes were kind when they met mine, grateful. Richard looked nervous, his shoulders tight with tension. They sat at the middle of the table, between the two families, literally and figuratively. Vance closed the door and returned to her position at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is difficult for everyone involved. We're here to discuss a proposal that might serve everyone's interests, but most importantly, Tyler's interests." She pulled out several documents and distributed copies around the table. "The Millers have proposed a shared access arrangement rather than pursuing full custody. This would allow Tyler to remain in his current home with Fred and Rachel, while establishing a relationship with his biological grandparents through supervised visitation." Rachel's head snapped up. "Supervised by whom?" "Initially, by a court-appointed family therapist," Vance explained. "Someone trained in adoption issues and family reunification. The visits would start brief and infrequent, then gradually increase as Tyler becomes comfortable." "And if he doesn't become comfortable?" Fred asked. "What if seeing them traumatizes him?" Dorothy flinched at the word traumatizes, but she spoke gently. "Mr. Powell, we don't want to hurt Tyler. If the therapist determines that contact with us is harmful, we'll accept that. But we're hoping, we're praying, that we can be a positive addition to his life, not a disruption." "You want to tell him his whole life is a lie?" Rachel said, her voice breaking. "You want to tell an 8-year-old boy that he was stolen, That we're not really his parents, that his name isn't even Tyler. No, Richard said firmly. We want to tell him the truth in an age-appropriate way. That his mother loved him very much and would have kept him if she could. That we've been looking for him for 5 years. That sometimes terrible things happen, but families can heal and grow. And us? Fred leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Where do we fit in your truth? Are we the villains? The people who stole you from your real family? You're the people who loved him when he had no one, Dorothy said, tears streaming down her face. You're the people who gave him a home, who raised him, who made him feel safe. You're his parents, Mr. Powell. We know that. We're not trying to replace you. Then what do you want? Rachel demanded. To be grandparents, Richard said simply. To know our grandson. To tell him stories about his mother. To be part of his life in whatever way doesn't harm him. Vance pulled out another document. I've drafted a proposed agreement. It includes specific parameters, visit frequency, duration, therapeutic oversight, and most importantly, a provision that Tyler's emotional well-being is the primary consideration. If at any point the arrangement becomes detrimental to him, it can be terminated. She slid copies across the table. Fred and Rachel read theirs silently, their faces unreadable. I watched them, these two people I loved, trying to navigate an impossible situation. There's something else, I said, breaking my silence. Everyone turned to look at me. Something I need to say before we go any further. Vance opened her mouth to object, but Fred held up a hand. Let her speak. I pulled out my folder and extracted a single sheet of paper, a letter I'd written last night. I've been doing research since this began, not just into the kidnapping case, but into Tyler himself, into who he is, who he's becoming. I passed copies of my letter around the table. This is everything I know about Tyler's emotional state right now, based on my observations before the restraining order. He's confused and scared. He knows something is wrong, that the adults around him are upset, but no one is explaining why. He thinks he did something wrong. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, fresh tears spilling over. He asked me that night, before everything exploded, why that boy on the poster looked like him, I continued. I didn't have an answer. But here's what I've learned from reading cases like this. Children are resilient, but only if we give them truth and stability. Lies destroy them. Silence destroys them. But honest, age-appropriate information, delivered with love and support, that helps them integrate difficult truths into their identity. I looked at Fred and Rachel. I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. But I've also been preparing something else. I pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table. This is a collection of resources. Books about talking to children about adoption and identity. Research on successful open adoption relationships. Contact information for therapists who specialize in this exact situation. And most importantly, case studies showing that children who maintain connections to their biological and adoptive families actually fare better psychologically than those forced to choose. Fred reached for the folder, flipping through it slowly. I saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that I'd been working toward a solution rather than just creating problems. There's one more thing, I said. I want to propose that I step back entirely. I know I've lost your trust, and I accept that. But don't let your anger at me prevent you from doing what's right for Tyler. The Millers' proposal is sound. It protects your family while giving Tyler access to his history. Please consider it on its own merits, not in the context of how it came to your attention. Vance looked impressed despite herself. That's very wise, Mrs. Powell. Rachel finally spoke, her voice small and broken. How do we tell him? How do we explain that his grandmother... She looked at me with such pain that I had to look away. How do we explain that you exposed our family because you saw a poster? That you destroyed our privacy, invited the media into our lives, made us suspects in our own son's adoption? You don't, I said quietly. You tell him that sometimes people make hard choices because they love someone. That I saw a family who'd lost a little boy, and I had to help them, even though it was painful for all of us. You tell him that truth matters, even when it's difficult. But you didn't just help them, Fred said, his first words directed at me. You helped other families too, didn't you? Mom, Detective Morrison told us. 18 other children. 18 other families who might get closure because you made that call. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I hate what you did, Fred continued, his voice rough with emotion. I hate that you went behind our backs, that you didn't trust us enough to come to us first. I hate that my son is going to grow up knowing his life started with a crime. I hate all of it. He paused, and I braced myself for the final blow. But I understand why you did it. And if I'm being honest, really honest, I think eventually I would have made the same call. He looked at Rachel. We would have made the same call. Because the alternative was living a lie, and we both know what lies do to families. Rachel was crying openly now. I just want him to be okay. That's all I want. I don't care about custody or legal rights or any of it. I just want Tyler to be happy and whole. Dorothy reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. Rachel didn't pull away. We want that too, Dorothy said. We've already lost our daughter. We can't lose our grandson by tearing him away from the only parents he's known. Let's work together. Let's build something new. Vance looked around the table. Are we ready to discuss specific terms? For the next 2 hours, we negotiated. The Millers would have supervised visits once a month initially, increasing to twice a month after 6 months if the therapist approved. Tyler would be told the truth in stages, starting with simple concepts. He had another family who loved him, who'd been looking for him, and gradually adding complexity as he matured and could handle it. Fred and Rachel would retain full legal custody. The Millers would have no decision-making authority regarding education, healthcare, or religion, but they would be included in major milestones, birthdays, graduations, important events. Most crucially, everyone agreed to participate in family therapy together, not separately, but as one extended unit, working toward integration rather than division. There's one more thing I'd like to add, Richard said as we were finalizing the agreement. An educational fund for Tyler. Dorothy and I want to contribute to his future. It's not about buying access or influence. It's about providing for our grandson the way we would have if Jennifer had lived. Fred started to object, but Rachel touched his arm. Let them do this. Let them contribute something positive. He nodded reluctantly. As we signed the preliminary agreement, subject to court approval and therapeutic assessment, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. This was the best possible outcome given the circumstances, but it didn't erase what had been lost. Trust, innocence, the simple joy of an uncomplicated family life, those were gone, possibly forever. After the Millers left, Fred and Rachel lingered. Vance excused herself, giving us privacy for the first time in over a week. Mom, Fred said, and the word felt like absolution and accusation all at once. We're not okay. Rachel and we're not okay with you right now. I know. But Tyler keeps asking about you. He wants to know why you're not calling, why you're not visiting. Fred's voice cracked. We can't keep you away from him forever. It's not fair to him. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. Tyler sitting at their kitchen table, surrounded by drawing paper. He'd drawn a picture of our family, Fred, Rachel, himself, and me. In the corner, he'd added 2 new figures labeled Other Grandma and Other Grandpa. He drew this yesterday, Rachel said. After we told him he was going to meet some new family members, he just added them to the picture, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like families could just expand to include more love. I stared at the drawing, at Tyler's simple solution to an impossibly complex problem. Maybe we can learn from him, I said softly. Fred handed me a card. This is Dr. Sarah Weinstein. She's the family therapist we've chosen to oversee the integration process. She wants to meet with all of us individually before the first group session. Your appointment is next Wednesday at 2. I'll be there. And Mom? Fred met my eyes, finally. Really met them. When Dr. Weinstein thinks it's appropriate, when Tyler's ready, you can see him again. Not before, but eventually. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was hope. As I drove back to Diane's house that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Miller. Thank you for advocating for this arrangement. Thank you for bringing our Cameron back to us. And thank you for making sure he doesn't have to lose anyone in the process. You're a remarkable woman, Carol Powell. I pulled over to the side of the road, overcome with emotion. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't destroyed everything. The path forward would be difficult, filled with therapy sessions and careful conversations and moments of painful truth. But it was a path, not an abyss. My phone buzzed again. This time, Fred. Tyler wants to know if you still make the best pancakes in the world. I told him we'd have to ask you yourself, someday soon. I typed back through tears. Tell him yes. Always yes. And I'll make them for him again as soon as I can. The response came quickly. He's drawing you another picture. He says it's for when you come home. Home. Not my house, but the family I belong to. The family that was broken and being slowly, painfully rebuilt. I sat in my car on the side of the road, watching the sun set over the Pennsylvania hills, and let myself believe that healing was possible. That truth, no matter how painful, was worth the cost. That families could survive even the most devastating revelations, and that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same thing. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making pancakes, the same kitchen where this whole journey had begun, though everything felt different now. The morning light streamed through the windows just as it had that day I'd returned from the pharmacy with Tyler, but the shadows had shifted. Some things could never go back to what they were. And perhaps, I was learning, that wasn't always a bad thing. My phone chimed. A text from Rachel. We're 10 minutes away. Tyler's been talking about your pancakes since he woke up. I smiled, flipping the pancakes with practiced ease. The therapy sessions with Dr. Weinstein had been grueling. Hours of confronting painful truths, acknowledging mistakes, learning to communicate through grief and anger. But slowly, incrementally, we'd rebuilt something. Not the same family we'd been before, but something more honest, more resilient. The first session I'd attended with Tyler, 6 weeks ago, had nearly broken me. He'd looked so small sitting in Dr. Weinstein's office, surrounded by toys and books designed to make children comfortable while discussing uncomfortable things. He'd looked at me with those distinctive eyes, one blue, one hazel, and asked simply, Grandma, why did you tell on us? Dr. Weinstein had helped me answer, not with excuses or justifications, but with truth. Because I saw another family who was hurting, who'd lost someone they loved very much. And I knew that helping them meant things would change for our family. It was the hardest decision I've ever made. Did you know I'd be sad? He'd asked. Yes. And that made it even harder. But sometimes being brave means doing something even when you know it will hurt. He'd thought about that for a long moment, his 8-year-old mind working through concepts most adults struggled with. Then he'd asked, Are the other grandparents nice? And that had been the beginning of healing. The visits with Dorothy and Richard had started slowly, awkwardly. That first meeting, with Dr. Weinstein present, had been in a park, neutral ground where Tyler could play if things got too intense. Dorothy had cried when she saw him up close for the first time, but she'd held it together enough to tell him stories about his mother Jennifer, how she'd loved to paint, how she'd had the same talent for drawing that Tyler had, how she'd wanted more than anything to be a good mother. Tyler had listened, solemn and curious, asking questions that broke our hearts. Did she love me? Why couldn't she keep me? Would she be happy I have 2 families now? Richard had answered that last one, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother would be so grateful that you've been loved and cared for. She would love Fred and Rachel for being the parents she couldn't be. Over the following weeks, Tyler had begun to integrate the 2 narratives of his life. He was Tyler Powell. That hadn't changed, they'd decided. His legal name would remain the same because that's who he'd been for most of his life. But he was also Cameron Westfield, and that history mattered too. Dr. Weinstein had helped him understand that both identities could coexist, that he didn't have to choose one truth over another. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. I looked out the window to see Fred's car pulling into the driveway. Tyler burst out of the back seat before the car had fully stopped, running toward my door with the boundless energy only an 8-year-old could muster. I opened the door and he launched himself at me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Grandma, I brought my new drawings to show you. I can't wait to see them," I said, hugging him tight, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and feeling the solid reality of him in my arms. These moments still felt precious, fragile, like something that could evaporate if I held on too tightly or not tightly enough. Fred and Rachel followed more slowly. Rachel carried a casserole dish. She'd started bringing food to our Sunday breakfasts, a peace offering that had become a tradition. Fred carried Tyler's backpack and a rolled-up poster board. "Something smells amazing," Rachel said, managing a genuine smile as she entered. Our relationship was still healing, still careful, but the sharp edges of her anger had dulled into something more manageable. Sadness, perhaps. Acceptance. "Pancakes are almost ready. Tyler, go wash your hands." I watched him scamper off to the bathroom, his footsteps echoing through the house in a way that made it feel alive again. "How was the visit yesterday?" I asked Fred as he set Tyler's things on the kitchen table. Yesterday had been Tyler's overnight stay with the Millers. The first one. A major milestone in the integration process. "Good, actually," Fred said, and I heard surprise in his voice. "He called us 3 times, but it was just to tell us about things they were doing. Dorothy took him to an art museum. Apparently they have some of Jennifer's paintings in storage and they showed him. He wants to start painting now." "They're good people," Rachel added quietly, pulling plates from my cupboard with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times before. "I talked to Dorothy this morning. She was so careful with him, so respectful of us. She made sure he called us before bed, reminded him we'd pick him up today." I felt a swell of gratitude for Dorothy and Richard. They could have fought, could have made this adversarial. Instead, they'd chosen to honor the family Tyler already had while carefully building a place for themselves. Tyler returned, hands dripping wet because he'd forgotten to dry them, and climbed onto his usual chair. "Grandma, guess what? Other Grandma Dorothy said my mom, my first mom, used to make a face just like I do when she was concentrating on painting. She showed me a picture. Other Grandma Dorothy. That's what he called her, to distinguish her from me. Not real grandma or biological grandma, just other, as if we were simply different versions of the same role. Children's logic could be remarkably wise. I served the pancakes, and we ate together like we had dozens of times before. But this time felt different, weighted with significance. We were choosing this normalcy, building it deliberately from the ruins of what had been destroyed. "Tyler, honey, show your grandmother what you made," Rachel prompted after we'd finished eating. Tyler jumped up and grabbed the rolled poster board, unrolling it on the table with flourish. It was a family tree, a project for school, Rachel explained, but it wasn't a traditional tree. Instead, Tyler had drawn 2 trees with intertwining branches, roots growing together underground. On one tree, he'd placed Fred, Rachel, and me. On the other, Dorothy, Richard, and a branch labeled Jennifer, my first mom, in heaven. And in the middle, where the roots tangled together, he'd drawn himself. "See?" he said proudly. "Mr. Peterson said family trees are supposed to show where you come from, but mine shows where I am now. 2 trees, 1 me." I stared at the drawing, this beautiful, heartbreaking representation of a child making sense of an impossibly complex situation. "It's perfect," I whispered. "Dr. Weinstein helped me with the idea," he said. "She said families can be lots of different shapes. Not just trees. Sometimes they're more like gardens with different plants all growing together." Fred and Rachel exchanged a look, and I saw the same wonder I felt reflected in their faces. Their son, because he was their son, no matter what biology said, was teaching us all how to navigate this new reality. After breakfast, Tyler wanted to play in the backyard, the same yard where Tom and I had pushed Fred on a swing 40 years ago. I watched him from the kitchen window while Fred and Rachel helped me clean up. "Mom," Fred said quietly, his hands submerged in soapy dishwater, "I need to tell you something." My heart clenched. Even now, 3 months later, I still braced for rejection. "Rachel and I have been talking, with Dr. Weinstein, and with each other." He paused, finding words. "We've been angry at you for so long, and we had a right to be. You made a choice that turned our lives upside down. Fred, Let me finish. He took a breath. But we've also come to realize that you made the only choice you could live with. And more than that, you were right. Tyler deserved to know the truth. The Millers deserved to know their grandson was alive. And those other 18 families, his voice broke slightly. They deserved answers too. Rachel moved to stand beside him, drying a plate with deliberate care. We saw on the news last week. 3 more families reunited with children who'd been missing for years. Because of your call. Because you had the courage to do something impossibly hard. It didn't feel like courage, I admitted. It felt like betrayal. Maybe it was both, Fred said. Maybe that's what real courage is. Doing the right thing even when it feels like a betrayal. Even when you know you'll lose something precious. He turned to face me, his hands still dripping with water. You lost us for a while. You lost Tyler. You lost your standing in this family. But you were willing to sacrifice all of that because you knew the truth mattered more than your comfort. That's who I want to be. That's who I want Tyler to learn to be. Tears streamed down my face. I never wanted to hurt you. We know. Rachel set down the plate and came to embrace me. We know that now. We're sorry it took so long to understand. We stood there, the 3 of us, crying and holding each other while Tyler's laughter drifted in from the backyard. The family I'd thought I'd destroyed was still broken in some ways, still scarred. But it was also healing, growing stronger in the broken places like bones that knit back together. Later that afternoon, after Fred and Rachel had taken Tyler home, I received a call from Detective Morrison. Mrs. Powell, I wanted to update you on the case. Robert Peterson was sentenced today. 40 years without parole. That's good, I said, though the news brought no satisfaction. Justice couldn't undo the damage, couldn't give those lost years back to the families he'd torn apart. There's more. Lauren Phillips received a plea deal, 8 years with possibility of parole after 5, given her cooperation and obvious remorse. But she wanted me to give you a message. What message? She said to tell you that you saved her life, that if you hadn't exposed the truth, she would have eventually succeeded in ending it. The guilt was destroying her, and now she has a chance to make amends, to testify against the others involved, to help undo some of the damage. She wanted you to know that. After we hung up, I thought about Lauren, about how we all carry secrets that corrode us from the inside. Sometimes exposure, painful, devastating exposure, was the only way to begin healing. That evening, I sat in Tom's chair and looked at the photos covering my mantel. Some were old, Fred as a baby, our wedding day, holidays long past. But there were new ones too. Tyler's school picture from this year, a photo from the first visit with Dorothy and Richard, everyone looking awkward and hopeful. A candid shot from last week's therapy session where Tyler was showing Dr. Weinstein his intertwined family trees. This was my family now. Complicated, unconventional, built from truth instead of comfortable lies. My phone chimed. A text from Dorothy. Tyler left his favorite stuffed bear here. We can bring it to church on Sunday if you're all still coming. We'd started attending church together. All of us. Tyler had asked for it, wanting to light a candle for his mother Jennifer. It had become another ritual, another thread weaving our fractured families into something whole. I texted back, "We'll be there. Thank you for taking such good care of him." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for raising him to be such a wonderful boy. Jennifer would be so proud, and so grateful to you all." I looked around my house, the same house I'd lived in for 40 years, where I'd raised Fred, where Tom had died, where I'd sat with Tyler at the kitchen table eating cookies while a terrible secret burned in my mind. The house hadn't changed, but everything else had. Age had given me something youth couldn't. The wisdom to know that truth matters more than comfort, that courage sometimes looks like betrayal, that families are built not just on love, but on the willingness to face hard things together. I thought about that day in the pharmacy when Tyler had pointed to the poster. How my world had tilted on its axis. How a simple observation had led to all of this pain and healing and transformation. If I could go back, would I make the same choice? The question had haunted me for months, but sitting there in the evening light, looking at photos of my fractured, healing, expanding family, I finally knew the answer. Yes, I would make the same choice, endure the same pain, lose the same things, because truth, no matter how devastating, was the foundation everything else had to be built on. Tyler deserved truth. The Millers deserved truth. Those 18 other families deserved truth. And my family, broken and rebuilding, was stronger for having faced it. My phone chimed again. Tyler this time, using Rachel's phone. "Grandma, I love you. Thank you for the pancakes. Can we have them again next Sunday?" I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. Every Sunday for as long as you want." Because that was what I could offer now. Consistency, presence, love, and truth. Not the easy grandmother who kept secrets and maintained comfortable lies, but the grandmother who'd chosen the hard path because it was the right one. The grandmother who'd lost everything and found something more valuable in the rebuilding. The grandmother who'd learned that age wasn't about growing weaker or less relevant, but about developing the strength to make impossible choices and live with their consequences. As darkness fell, I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere out there, other families were being reunited because of that phone call I'd made. Other children were learning their true identities. Other grandparents were finding hope after years of despair. The cost had been enormous. But the alternative, living with that secret, watching Tyler grow up, never knowing his history, letting the Millers die without knowing their grandson was alive, that cost would have been greater. I'd made my choice and I'd paid the price. But I'd also received something unexpected in return. Redemption, reconciliation, and the knowledge that truth, no matter how painful, was always worth fighting for. My home, this house, this family, this life, had been torn apart and rebuilt. Not the same as before, but something new and honest and, in its way, more beautiful for having been broken and repaired. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to the future, to Sunday pancakes, to intertwined family trees, to children who taught adults how to love across impossible divides, and to the fierce, patient wisdom that came with age. The wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go, when to keep secrets and when to expose them, when comfort mattered less than truth, and when love, real, honest, tested love, was strong enough to survive even the most devastating revelations.